You know that kind of person who just hates everything? The wind is too strong. The sun is too hot. The neighbor parked his car half an inch out of line, and that's a big problem. That was her case. A person who couldn't exist without being angry about something. But if there was one thing she seemed to hate more than anything else in the world, it was my dog. Which is funny, because she was the most peaceful creature alive. Max, a golden Labrador, was always the kind of dog who would see a stranger and think he'd just met a new best friend. Playful, cheerful, a bit clumsy, but completely harmless. He loved to run around the yard and sometimes escape to her lawn. He never dug holes, never barked non-stop, never destroyed anything. But for this woman, it was as if he were the devil himself incarnate in dog form. It started with the looks. Whenever Max appeared on her lawn, even just to sniff around a bit before running back, she would give him a look of pure disgust. Then came the audible grumbles. Sometimes I'd go out to call Max back, and I'd hear the woman snorting, crossing her arms and rolling her eyes as if I'd let a wild boar loose in her yard. And then the direct complaints began. The first time was relatively polite. Relatively. She showed up at my door with that expression of someone who was about to recite the rules of a coexistence manual that only existed in her head, and said something like, "Your dog is trespassing on my property. You need to do something about it." What did I do? I installed a slightly higher fence in my yard. But Max, being Max, still found ways to get close to her house. He never really broke in, but he would run up to the boundary, wag his tail, look around curiously, and go home happy. That was enough to trigger her deep hate mode. The woman started complaining louder. She would walk past my house and mutter to herself about disrespect, lack of education, and people who don't know how to control their animals. The situation escalated when one day, in the middle of the afternoon, I heard a scream outside. I ran to see what had happened and found Max cowering by the fence, whimpering, and his wife on the other side holding a broom with a broken end. My heart raced. Max was limping, holding one of his paws in the air. His normally cheerful gaze was full of pain and fear. I froze. I didn't need to be a genius to understand what had happened. This woman, she had hurt my dog. If there was one thing I never thought I'd have to deal with in my life, it was a neighbor who hates dogs. Like, real hatred. It wasn't just the classic pet peeve of people who don't like fur or find dogs noisy. This woman hated Max's existence with all her might. And now, she had gone from grumbling and crooked looks to something much worse. My dog was on the floor, curled up, trembling. His hind leg was bent in a way that didn't seem right. His gaze, which normally shone with joy, was now full of pain and fear. And on the other side of the fence, holding a broom with a broken tip, was her. The woman didn't even try to hide it. She didn't even disguise it. She just stood there, looking at me with that unbearable air of superiority, as if she had just performed a great act of divine justice. Maybe now he'll learn to stay in his place. That was the first thing she said. I swear, it was close enough that I didn't drop everything and jump over that fence. The blood rushed up so fast that I almost saw everything red. My whole body was shaking, not from fear, but from pure fury. She'd hurt my dog, the most docile animal in the world, who never barked at anyone for no reason, who never attacked, never growled, never did anything but exist and be happy. And now he was there, on the ground, whimpering in pain because this woman had simply decided that it was unacceptable for a dog to step on her lawn. But before I could let out anything, a scream, a curse, anything, Max moaned softly. That brought me back to reality. The most important thing at that moment wasn't to fight with her. Not yet. I picked Max up with all the care in the world, trying not to touch his injured paw. He weighed a lot, but at that moment it felt like I was holding a feather. As I opened the car door, I looked at her once more. She was still standing there, staring at me with her arms crossed, and a cold look on her face. And that's when she unleashed the second pearl of the night. If you had taught him to respect other people's property, this wouldn't have happened. Have you ever felt a level of anger so great that your whole body heats up? Your hands tremble, your heart races, your vision even sharpens. That's what happened to me. But Max moaned again in my lap, as if reminding me that this wasn't the time. I just closed the car door and drove off. The drive to the vet seemed to take forever. Every time Max moved his paw and let out a low moan, my heart squeezed harder. I alternated between looking at the road and looking at him, trying to hold in my anxiety, trying not to let my head explode with anger before it was time. When we finally arrived, I got out of the car and went straight to the clinic. The vet didn't take long to call us. He was an experienced guy. He must have seen it all, but when he examined Max and saw the swelling on his paw, he sighed heavily. "That's a fracture right there." It was like being punched in the stomach. The vet ran some tests and confirmed that the bone was broken. It wasn't the worst kind of fracture, but it was serious enough to need immobilization and a long recovery time. He'll need absolute rest for a few weeks. No running, no rough play. And, of course, we'll have to control the pain with medication. No running, no playing. My dog, who was basically a hurricane of happiness in Labrador form, would now have to be confined for weeks because a woman thought she had the right to teach him a lesson. I couldn't even really process what I was feeling. It was a mixture of sadness, guilt, and anger. Max didn't deserve this. He didn't do anything to deserve this. After getting the medicine and instructions from the vet, I went back to the car and put Max in the back seat with all the care in the world. He looked at me with those big brown eyes, not quite understanding what was going on, but trusting me. This only made my anger grow even more. I gripped the steering wheel so hard that my fingers hurt. The woman who had done this was there, comfortable in her house, perhaps even pleased with herself. Maybe she thought she had won, but she had no idea what awaited her, because I wasn't going to let it go. If she wanted war, she was going to get war. When I got home, Max was already groggy from the pain medication. The vet had recommended complete rest, so I carried him to a makeshift bed in the living room, where I put blankets and a pillow for him to lie on. He lay there, breathing heavily, clearly not understanding why he couldn't run around the house like he always did. It broke me. My dog, who until yesterday had been pure joy, was now stuck there, limited, unable to move properly. It was her fault. And as I watched Max trying to adjust himself with that cast on his paw, I could only think of one thing. This woman is going to pay for this. The plan began to form in my head immediately. First thing, gather evidence. Luckily, I already had an ally in this without even having to ask. Mr. Martinez. This man should have worked as a detective, because from the day this woman set foot in the neighborhood, he started documenting everything she did wrong. So, before I did anything, I went to his house. Martinez was already waiting for me on the porch, as if he knew I'd show up. I saw everything. That was the first thing he said, without even waiting for me to speak. He took me into the living room and showed me the images from his security camera. And there it was, Max, running excitedly near the fence, just sniffing the air, without even really entering the woman's yard. Then, out of nowhere, she appears, holding a broom. She looks around, as if making sure no one is watching. And then, without hesitation, she hits Max with all her might. The video showed everything. The blow, Max staggering backwards, and her simply spinning on her heels and going back inside as if nothing had happened. My blood boiled watching it. "Are you going to call the police?" Martinez asked. I nodded. This woman couldn't get away with this. I went home, picked up my phone, and made the call. "I'd like to report a case of mistreatment of an animal. I have video evidence." The operator was quick to give me instructions. I was asked to go to the police station with the video and a veterinarian's report on Max's fracture, and that's exactly what I did. Early the next morning, I went to the police station. When I showed the video to the policeman on duty, he watched in silence, his eyes narrowing. When he finished, he let out a heavy sigh and shook his head. "This is a crime. Do you want to file a formal complaint?" I don't think I've ever said yes so quickly in my life. The complaint was registered, and the police promised to investigate. But honestly, I wish it had gone faster. This woman was there, living her life normally, while Max was stuck at home, dealing with the pain she had caused. And I knew that, sooner or later, she would find out that the police were after her. I just wanted to see the reaction, so I did. In the late afternoon, I was sitting on the porch when I heard a police car pull up in front of her house. 2 officers got out and knocked on the door. It took me less than 2 seconds to get up and go and pretend to be watering the plants, just to get a better look. The door opened, and there she was, looking as superior as ever. But as the policeman started talking, her expression changed. First came confusion, then denial, then panic. She started gesticulating, pointing in my direction, probably trying to turn this into yet another story where she was the victim. But the police weren't falling for it. After a few minutes, she retreated inside and closed the door tightly. But what didn't she know? That was only the beginning. The woman finally realized that she wasn't dealing with a simple neighborhood problem. She had committed a crime, and now justice was after her. The woman thought she would get away with it, that she could hurt a defenseless dog and go on with her life as if nothing had happened. Perhaps, in her sick mind, it wasn't even a real problem. Maybe she thought she would reverse the situation, make up some story, blame it on me and get away with it. But reality hit her like a brick when the police showed up. Over the next few days, she tried to pretend that nothing was happening. She walked through the neighborhood with that arrogant walk, avoided looking in my direction, and pretended she hadn't received a subpoena to testify. But I knew, and so did she. The neighborhood, which had previously tolerated her outbursts, began to change its attitude. Gossip spread faster than wildfire. The woman who issued fines for non-standard grass? The same one who gave everyone hell over stupid HOA rules? Now she was a criminal who broke a dog's paw because she couldn't deal with the idea that a Labrador was having fun near her yard. Her reputation sank faster than the Titanic. And, of course, I took advantage of that. When I was called to make a formal statement, I took everything: the video of the assault and the vet's report confirming the fracture. The police officer who took my case was one of those experienced guys who has seen all sorts of absurdities and isn't easily impressed. But when he watched the video, he let out a "what a sick woman" before writing down the information. "This is serious. We could open criminal proceedings against her for mistreating animals. If convicted, she could face anything from a fine to imprisonment." That's what I wanted to hear. The hearing was scheduled a few weeks later, and in the meantime, the woman became more and more of a pariah in the neighborhood. The neighbors began to retaliate in small but satisfying ways. Mrs. Peterson, who used to smile and wave politely at everyone, now looked away whenever she saw the woman. Mr. Martinez, always discreet, started looking directly at her and shaking his head in disapproval when they crossed paths. Even the HOA, which she used as a weapon against everyone, began to pretend she didn't even exist. And that's how her empire began to crumble. The woman appeared in court, dressed as if she were going to a funeral. Perhaps it was the burial of her own reputation, which, in this case, was completely deserved. When the judge called the case, my lawyer presented the evidence without much effort. The video spoke for itself. The judge watched it and took a deep breath before facing her. "Do you have anything to say about this video?" She tried to argue. She tried to dodge. She tried to pretend that it was an accident and that she didn't mean to hurt the dog. But how do you hit a dog with a broom as hard as you can and call it an accident? The judge didn't buy the story. The decision was swift and brutal. And finally, she was removed from the HOA. That's it. The great queen of ridiculous rules was kicked out of the only position that made her feel important. That day, as I left the courthouse, I realized that for the first time she didn't have that arrogant pose. She didn't have that look of superiority. She was defeated, and you know what? I slept very well that night. Max, already recovering, slept next to me, snoring lightly. The dog she had tried to destroy was still there. And what about her? Well, she was just another forgotten name in the neighborhood. And if you liked this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel.